Good morning. I'm going to be reading chapter 28 of The Mighty Miss Malone. It begins on 248, called The New Turned Leaf. Mother's favorite saying is, where there's a will, there's a way. And my will was strong enough to find a way to write her a note, borrow money out of the filing cabinet, buy a Greyhound bus ticket, and come to Detroit all by myself. It was 10 o'clock at night. For the first time in my life, I wasn't in bed asleep. Instead, I was squeezing my pocketbook to my chest, standing behind a tree in Detroit, Michigan. Across the street was the address that Mr. Z said was the New Turned Leaf, a speakeasy, a nightclub. Remember, this is where she's going to see if she can find Jimmy. I kept peeking at the house, trying to figure it out. I know you can't read what someone's like by the way they look. The person who seems to be kind and understanding may be using that look to hide something horrible, while the person who at first sight scares you might turn out to be the gentlest soul you'll ever meet. And things like houses hide their secrets even better than people do. Things don't even have to try. My heart sank. Nothing seemed to match up with the horrible rumors I've heard about speakeasies. The minute I decided I was going to come to Detroit by myself, I'd been scared to death about what I'd see once I got to the New Turned Leaf. I thought there'd be all sorts of loose grown-ups, half undressed, shouting and fighting. I thought there'd be drunken men laying in the mud next to a pile of people who'd been stabbed or shot or had drunk themselves to death that night. I imagined having to cover my ears to block out the gut-wrenching wails of children who were crying to their mothers or fathers not to spend all the grocery money on whiskey or beer or dice. But if those things were going on in this place, you could have fooled me. This New Turned Leaf was about the most unexciting thing I could think of. It looked the same as any other nice house that rich people lived in. Excuse me, I want to get a drink. My throat is dry. Sorry. The curtains on both floors were drawn and were so thick that if there were lamps on inside, you'd never know. The front yard was tidy with a strip of geraniums growing along the side. There wasn't even a sign that let you know that this was only the number 3121 lit up on a porch light. The only thing that made me think this was more than just a regular rich person's home was that in a few minutes I stood behind the tree. 4 couples and 3 or 4 men by themselves walked through the gate and followed the sidewalk to disappear around the back of the house. The men were all wearing very fancy suits and hats and ties. Mr. Marvelous Marvin had fit right in. The women were in some most beautiful dresses and shoes I'd ever seen. A lot of Sunday-going to hats had escaped from their boxes a couple of days early. I was so glad I was wearing my blue gingham jumper. I'd stick out like a roach floating in buttermilk in other dresses. 1 or 2 of the men were walking in the rooster-strutting way that Jimmy and his hoodlum friends did back in Gary. Everybody nodded or shook hands with short, thick man half hidden in shadows leaning against the side of the house. I got the feeling it wasn't about to just let any old body go past him without some kind of trouble, even a scared-looking girl dressed in very nice blue gingham. The curtains in one of the windows came apart, and a triangle of light shone through the darkness. A tiny head, or it looked like a 5 or 6-year-old girl's, was at the base of the triangle of light, and a pair of eyes locked right on me. She must have been watching me as long as I'd been watching the house. She raised her hand to wave, then jerked her head around to look back into the room. The curtains fell and smothered the light. I started walking to the corner so I could circle around the house, but hadn't gone 5 steps before my second brain started filling my head with its unusual nonsense. Here goes her second brain again. Well, kiddo, what if that child is a prisoner in this speakeasy? What if the little girl was getting ready to signal you to call the police when one of the murderers or drinkers or thieves or gamblers who were holding her prisoner came back into the room to make sure she hadn't escaped? What then? Concentrate, Deza. I kept walking toward the corner. My heart started pounding once I turned down the alley. Maybe Jimmy wasn't here after all. Maybe he was traveling, and maybe I should give up and go back to Flint. I kept walking past the speakeasy, cutting my eyes at it so if someone was watching, they'd think I was just a girl walking through an alley, not someone looking to find their brother or rescue a little girl who had been kidnapped by the gamblers. Then something made the doubts go away. A door on the side of the house that didn't have any kind of knob on it opened and a man came out. He only took a few steps, then dropped to his hands and knees. 2 times his back bucked up like one of those rodeo horses in the movie. He started throwing up more junk than you'd think a human being could ever have swallowed. And the best thing was, he finally got up and started running on his tiptoes towards the front of the house. I saw that door hadn't closed all the way behind him. Doors without knobs, people coming out to throw up, guards hiding in the shadows, little girls held prisoner upstairs. When you add everything up, this was for sure a speakeasy. I watched the man on the tiptoes until he turned the corner. Once he disappeared, I held my breath and slowly walked to the door. I put my ear near the crack. No screaming or loud noises. I put my fingers in the door and pulled it open so I could peek. My head started spinning, and I don't know if it was from the relief or disappointment. There was nothing but a narrow hallway. A bright light bulb hung from a wire, and there was another closed door at the end. This one had a doorknob on it. I stepped into the new turned leaf and shut the door behind me. I walked to the second door, and without thinking what might be on the side, I grabbed the doorknob and turned and pushed the door. It didn't budge. I leaned my shoulder into it and pushed really hard. It came open a crack. I put all my weight into the next push, and the heavy door moved far enough for me to stick my head through. For the second time that night, my head started spinning, but this time it had a good reason. So I wonder if it will hold true if a speakeasy is as horrible as it sounds of what Deza has in her mind. What's to come in chapter 29? We'll see you soon.